Hi everyone, Cassie here from Primrose Dock, and welcome to week 2 of the Delvine Bralette solo. This week we will be printing out the pattern and using the layers function, so we only print out the sizes that we need. We will be adjusting the dart placement if necessary to fit your body. We will be cutting up the lace overlays, mirroring them so that they are symmetrical. I will show you a few options for sewing the darts, and we will also be attaching the lace overlays to the front. Let's get started. Once you've determined your size, you'll want to print out your pattern pieces. Now the instructions for printing the pattern are on pages 6 and 7 of the instructions. And this pattern uses the layer functions. Each size is on a layer. The cup sizes are grouped together with the sister sizes. And so you'll want to turn off the sizes that you don't need. It'll make it easier for cutting if only your size is showing up. The band sizes are grouped together according to the sister sizes, so you will have to cut on the correct lines for that. So to turn off the layers that you don't need, once you open up the pattern, you'll see the layers panel, and each of the squares will have a little eyeball in it, and you'll only want to keep the eyeball for your size. And you'll also want to keep on the titles and the key for the stretch guide and size boxes. So you'll want to click on each of the layers that you don't want, and then you'll see them disappear on your screen. And on page 7, there's the pages to print by the size. And so you'll want to look up your size and see which of the pages that you want to print. And these images below show the master of the pattern altogether, just showing you how they are taped together. After you've printed out your pattern, there are a couple more things that you want to check before cutting out all of your pieces. I'm looking at page 8 of the instructions. One is the height of the hook and eye. I have assumed for this pattern that your hook and eye is 2 1/4 inches high. But if you are using a heat-sealed hook and eye, the size might be a little bit different depending on what manufacturer you've ordered it from. So down at the bottom here, there are some instructions on how you can adjust the back bands to conform to the height of your hook and eye. And the other thing you'll want to check is the dart placement. You want the dart to line up with the apex of your body, and you'll have to take some measurements, and there's brief instructions here in the pattern on how to do that. And I've also already made a video showing a little more in depth how to do this. The video is linked inside the pattern, so you can click on the hyperlink, but I will also include it here in this video. I have my pattern pieces cut out now, and for the sample I'll be showing you, I'm going to be making front D with this lace overlay, cradle G, which is the plain cradle, it doesn't have the lace along the bottom, and back I, which is the princess seam back that has the lace on the inner part and just the power net on the outer part. And before I begin cutting out my fabric pieces, I wanted to show you 2 tools that you may not have seen before. I have a degree in fashion design, and these were 2 of the tools that were given to me when I went through my fashion design program. The first is a pattern notcher, and this really comes in handy when you need to cut out the notches on your pattern. And you can see it just leaves a little mark. This is about 1/4 inch, I think. And since this pattern has 1/4 inch seam allowances, this is really handy for marking the notches. And the other one is an awl, and I use this to punch out the marks for the apex. Actually, you don't need to mark the apex on the pattern. What you need to mark is the top of the dart. And you can just punch a hole in your fabric with it. And also sometimes it helps to use this while you're sewing if you need to hold on to a very small point in your fabric and your fingers are just too big. So you can get both of these tools from Wawak. That's WAWAK.com. They sell professional pattern making and sewing supplies. I usually order zippers, thread, and buttons from them, but they have a lot of useful tools as well. I've been cutting out my pattern pieces, and I wanted to share with you a couple of tips. One thing I just discovered, I was cutting out the back band, and I was trying to be economical with the fabric I've had. I've already cut out a few projects from it, so I had some kind of funny shaped edges. So I cut out only one layer of the band just to fit it into a funny shaped piece. And I realized that my rotary cutter had a much easier time going through the one layer. I usually try to cut both layers at the same time, and I frequently end up with some really jagged edges. So if you have trouble cutting through the power net, try just cutting one layer at a time, and you might have some better results. And the next thing I wanted to tell you about was marking the dart on the front. I know at the beginning I told you about using transfer paper. In this particular sample, I'm using a very sheer fabric. So you don't have to use transfer paper if you can see through your fabric. You can just line it up. I've marked all the notches. I've marked the bottom of the dart legs and the top. And so if you can see the lines through your fabric, you can mark the dart legs with your marking tool of choice. I'm using one of my Crayola pens. And then you can see I have the dart marked. Now, if your fabric isn't sheer, and if you don't have transfer paper, I want to share with you a trick that one of my pattern testers came up with. She printed out an extra copy of the front, and she cut out the dart. Now, this is front B and C. This is what I used in the long line bra, but I'll use it for demonstration purposes here. So you can just align where your notches are, where the bottom of the dart legs are, and then you can use that to trace the dart shape. So I thought that was a really cool trick. I can't take credit for it. I'm getting ready to cut out my pieces out of my stretch lace fabric now, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that. On the pattern piece it says, align the lowest point of the lace with arrows to this line. So what does that mean, the lowest point of the lace? If you look at the lace edge, there's all sorts of scallops, and if you line it up with a ruler, you'll find that the lowest point is the very bottom of the lowermost scallops. You can see there's scallops up here that don't quite come as far down, but we don't want to lose any of our pattern piece, so we want to align the straight line to the lowest point of the scallops. And we also want to consider where the ends of the lace are going to end up when they join the other pattern pieces. And we want to think about this because this is the center front of the front piece here. This is going to join into the cradle, and we want to make sure that that's as close to the lowest point as possible. If we were to place the pattern piece like this, then we have all this extra bit coming out here, which I guess is okay, but then that means that the fronts of the overlays are going to overlap, and that could just be hard for you to align. So you want to think about how these lace pattern pieces fit into the other pattern pieces. So seam allowance here is 1/4 of an inch, so I think I'm going to align it like that. And I'm aligning the straight edge with the lowest points. And so I'm going to cut out around this piece. This is just a single layer of the lace. And we're going to use what we cut out later on to cut the opposite side. And I'm going to do the same with this band piece. This is the align the lowest point of the lace to the straight edge here. And this is the part where the hook and eye attaches. And so we don't want excess lace sitting outside of that. So I'm going to try and align to the lowest parts of the lace there. And I also want to take a look at what the strap attachment point is going to look like. If it was ending up something like that, where we have all this extra sticking out, and I know that I'm going to be having to put this end through a ring here, that's just going to make it more difficult. So we want to think about where this point ends and also where this ends. You might have to play around with your pattern piece a little bit depending on the size of the scallops in your lace. The bigger the scallops are, the more little finicky that this is going to be. So I like how these pieces are placed now. I'm going to go ahead and cut them out, and then I'll come back to show you cutting the second layer. Okay, I've cut my 2 pieces out of the lace, and I had the lace right side up when I was cutting it. So after I was done, I had to flip the piece over and flip the pattern piece over and mark everything on the wrong side. If you're having trouble telling the right side and the wrong side of your lace, because sometimes both sides look pretty, just feel the lace, and there will be a lot more texture on the right side of the lace. You can see on this particular lace there's some raised threads, while as the wrong side is much flatter. So now we need to cut the second layer, and we're going to use the pieces that we just cut out to help us figure out where they need to go. Now you might just flip it over and think, oh, big flower needs to go on top of the big flower. But if you see this flower is going this way, but that flower is going that way, so that's not quite right. So we need to turn our lace around, and yeah, now these flowers are going the same direction. So we'll want to align the edges and make sure that everything lines up. The edges of the lace align, and all of these surrounding elements around the cut edge align as well. So we know we've found the right place in the lace to put the second layer. And we're going to do the same with the back. So now we can see that the flowers are going in the same direction. And we'll just line up the scallops. And I just barely have enough, let me slide this down so you can see. I just barely have enough on this edge to cut this piece out. And all the surrounding elements blend in. So now I'm just going to add my pattern pieces on top of that, and I'm going to turn them over so they're wrong side up and put that on top as well, because sometimes it's hard to see just this piece that's already been cut out. We want to have some really clear edges of what we need to be cutting out. So you can see I accidentally did double-sided printing on this pattern, and I had to print everything out again. So I'm going to get that nicely aligned, and then I'll put my weights down. Oops, I'll do a better job of lining it up. And then I'm going to cut around with my rotary cutter the second layer. I've finished cutting everything out, and I've laid it on my cutting board, sort of in the order that it'll be once it's put together. And I just wanted to make sure that I like how it's going to look, and I do. I think it's going to be really pretty, so I'm excited to get to work on sewing it. Before we begin working on the lace overlays, I want to show you two different finishing options and why I chose the one that I did for the pattern. So the way I have it written, I have you put the lace overlay on top of the front and sew down along the scalloped edge, and then you treat both layers as one fabric. So when you sew the darts, you end up with the raw edges inside. And the reason I did this is I didn't want the seam allowances showing through to the front. The way that this is sewn, you can see that the seam allowance is nearly invisible, and you really can't even see the dart. But I understand if you feel that this would be irritating on your skin, so I do have a solution for that. So here's a sample of the way the pattern is written. I have put in the overlay on top of the main fabric and sewed the dart together as one layer, and you end up with the seam allowances on the inside. But as you can see, the dart is nearly invisible from the right side. Now another option you have is to sew the darts separately in each layer. So I sewed the dart only in the lace, and then I sewed the dart separately only in the main fabric, and then I put them together. But as you can see the seam allowance through the front of the lace. But it is a clean finish on the inside. So you have to think about what you really want. If you feel like the seam allowance is going to be too irritating for you. This lace pattern has a lot of open mesh in the back. If you were to use a more dense lace, something more heavily patterned, you probably wouldn't see the seam allowance coming through. So take a look at your lace and see what you want to do. The third option would be to form the darts together in the lace and the front fabric, just like this, and have the raw edge. And then you could add in a separate lining and then face those seam allowances together on the inside. And once we start getting all these layers together, that can add more bulk. So you would want to use a very thin lining fabric. You would want to use Surecup lining, some 15 denier, or even bra tulle. So those are some options you have if you want to avoid having the seam allowances touching your skin on the dart. Before we begin sewing, I'm going to use my ODIF 505 temporary adhesive spray to attach the lace overlays to the main fabric. I've put some newspaper down on the floor here, and I know it's hard to see. This is my main fabric piece here. It's in this white sheer fabric, so it's hard to see on the newspaper. But I'm going to spray my lace overlays. These are wrong sides up, and it's kind of hard to tell on this which is the right side and the wrong side, but the right side has the raised threads. So I've put the right sides down, and I'm going to use my spray here. Shake it a little bit. And you don't want to use tons of the spray, just enough to make it stick. And I'm just going to carefully align the cut edges and where I have the darts. And I might need to reposition a little bit. It really is hard to see this main fabric, just because it's so sheer. There we go. Just press it down a little bit, make it stick. Okay, and I'm going to do that for the other side, and then I'll see you at my sewing machine. I'm at my sewing machine now, and all I'm going to do is work a narrow zigzag along the scalloped edges of the lace, just to secure it down. I have my machine set on just a regular zigzag in a 2 width and 2 length. You'll probably want to do a test scrap and see what machine settings work best for you. Now I'm using a turquoise thread, just so maybe you have a better chance of seeing what it looks like along the edges. You'll want to use a thread color that blends in the best with your lace. I have both ivory and the turquoise in this lace, so I really could have gone with either one. You can put the needle down, and I'm going to try and just work slowly and go around the edges of the lace. Pivot at the center point, and then come back up. Okay, there I've zigzagged along the edge. You can see it a little bit. Now, if you don't use a temporary adhesive spray, you'll want to baste along the other edges of the lace just to hold the 2 layers together. Hi everyone, Cassie here from Primrose Dawn, and today I'm going to talk about moving the dart position on the Delvine Bralette. As you can see, the Delvine Bralette is shaped with bust darts, and you want the bust darts to align with the apex of the breast. And this is the point that sticks out furthest from the body, usually where the nipple lies. I'm going to demonstrate measuring on my dress form. You'll want to measure this on yourself. And find where your apex is and measure straight across from apex to apex. On this form, it's about 7 3/4 inches. And you'll want to write this down and then determine what half of this measurement is, because on the pattern piece, we're only measuring half of the body. Now we're ready to alter our pattern pieces. Regardless of what front you want to do, you'll want to make this alteration beginning with the fronts for A, D, E, and F. Even if you want to make fronts B and C, you'll want to begin with altering this pattern piece because it extends all the way to center front, and it'll just make your life a lot easier if you alter this pattern piece and then copy the alterations to the other front for B and C. So half of our apex to apex measurement would be 3 7/8. The original measurement was 7 3/4. So I'm going to check the apex position. You want to move the apex position and not the end of the dart. So I'm going to measure across, and this is about 3 7/8. So this is the correct position to fit my dress form. But let's say we want to move it in to about here. I'll mark this with my red pen so that you can see it. Okay, so let's say we want to move the dart there. The easiest thing to do to keep the original curved shape of the dart is to cut this dart out and move the position. So I'm just cutting out the dart piece. And you want to put some paper behind. Okay, and you want to line it up where your new apex position is. Line it up with the old one. Okay, and you'll want to tape down the new position. You'll want to make sure that the dart is straight. Working. So you might need to adjust this line here. Blend it, to blend it in. And however much you moved the dart position, you'll want to also adjust your cradle piece. Okay, so this is where the dart lines up. So you'll want to move the position of this notch. So you won't use this notch, you'll use this one. And that's it. That's it for this week. Next week we will be sewing the darts. We will be sewing the front into both layers of the cradle. And we will be sewing the princess seam for the back. And then we will be assembling the bra straps. If you have any questions, leave a comment below. Bye for now.